All right, ready to dive deep into this amazing world of language acquisition. How do we learn, the importance of interaction? What happens when those early conversations are anything but typical? We've got some really interesting research lined up today.
Absolutely. It's so easy to kind of take language for granted, but when we really examine it, the intricate dance happening in our brains, especially in those first few years, it's astounding.
Totally. And to kick things off, let's jump into this case study that really highlights how crucial those early interactions really are. Imagine a young boy. We'll call him Jim. Jim's story is unique, right? Because while he could hear perfectly, his parents were deaf and primarily communicated through lip reading.
Yeah, and this case, studied by Sachs and his team back in '81, presents this situation where Jim wasn't exposed to sign language either. So even though he was surrounded by this loving family, he lacked that constant back and forth conversation that's so crucial.
And that's where it gets interesting. At 3 years and 9 months old, Jim's language was behind his peers. He grasped concepts for his age, but grammar was off, word order was a struggle. It was like he understood the pieces, but couldn't quite put the puzzle together.
Exactly. And this underscores a really crucial point, just being exposed to language. Like even for hours on end, like with the television, it isn't enough.
Right, like just hearing it constantly isn't enough.
Right. Think of it this way. You can listen to music for hours, but it doesn't mean you can play an instrument, right? It's the active engagement, those attempts to communicate that really, really shape understanding.
Hmm?
So Jim could comprehend to a degree, but he couldn't use language himself effectively.
So what happened? Did Jim continue to struggle?
So this is where things take a turn. Jim starts having these regular one-on-one sessions with an adult who focused intently on conversational interaction.
Yeah.
And the results, they were remarkable. By 4, almost all those unusual speech patterns vanished.
Wow. That's incredible. Like his brain suddenly just clicked, found the missing piece.
Exactly. And this incredible turnaround just shows how plastic our brains are. Even when those early language pathways are missed, focused, personalized interaction, it can help a child catch up. A real testament to human connection and the brain's ability to adapt.
So it's not just about hearing words. It's that interactive dance of language, that give and take, that lets a child test their understanding, get feedback, and really fine-tune how they communicate.
Absolutely, and this brings up a fascinating question. Why is this back and forth so critical? It's not just mimicking sounds. It's about the brain making sense of this complex system we call language.
I'm all ears. What is it about that direct interaction?
Well, think about it. When we converse with a child, we are constantly adjusting our speech based on their reactions, their comprehension, their ability to engage. We rephrase, we use gestures, we emphasize. A very dynamic process, and this is something that passive language exposure just cannot replicate.
Like we instinctively become linguistic coaches, tailoring everything to guide their development.
Exactly. And it's in that dynamic exchange that the magic happens. Those adjustments, they create a feedback loop, fine-tuning the child's understanding, shaping the very structure of their language processing, building a bridge between sounds and meaning, word by word, sentence by sentence.
Okay, so we've established interaction is key. But how does the brain actually take all that messy, real-world language input and turn it into something meaningful? Seems like a pretty incredible feat.
It really is, and this is where this fascinating theory called connectionism comes in. Now imagine the brain as this vast network of interconnected points, constantly forming and refining connections based on the input it receives. Every time a child encounters a word paired with an object, an action, even a feeling, a connection forms in this intricate web.
So it's like building a mental map of language where words are the landmarks and those connections are like the roads linking everything together.
That's a great way to put it. And just like any good map, this mental representation is constantly evolving, becoming more detailed, more nuanced over time.
So with this idea of a mental map constantly evolving, does that mean like a child's understanding of a word can actually change over time?
Absolutely. Think about a child learning the word, say, family. Initially, it might be this very concrete connection, right? Like limited to the people they live with every day. But as they grow, encounter different family structures, grasp concepts like extended family or even chosen family, that initial connection, it branches out, forming these new pathways, new understandings.
It's like adding new cities to that mental map you were talking about, revealing a much richer landscape than they first imagined.
Precisely. And this process of expanding, refining our understanding, it's ongoing. It doesn't stop in childhood.
Yeah.
Every new experience, every conversation, it can reshape those connections, add nuanced depth to that language map.
That's fascinating. So it's not just accumulating words, it's those words gaining layers of meaning, becoming more intricately woven into like the fabric of how we understand things.
Exactly. And this process of weaving and refining, it isn't always straightforward.
Hmm.
Just like a child might overgeneralize at first, like calling all furry creatures doggy, their mental maps can sometimes lead to, misunderstandings, misinterpretations.
Oh, absolutely. Like when a child learns that you add more sand to a bucket and then assumes you also add more swing when you're pushing them, stuff like that.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
Hmm.
And connectionism helps explain not just how we learn, but also why we make those kinds of errors along the way, right? It highlights this active role our brains play in making sense of language, constantly seeking those patterns, making generalizations, even if they need a little adjusting along the way.
It's like our brains are these little linguistic detectives, constantly gathering clues, piecing together the rules of language, even if they get a few things wrong in the process.
That's a wonderful analogy. And what's so remarkable is that this whole process is happening mostly beneath the surface.
Yeah.
We don't consciously tell our brains to form these connections or prune away unnecessary ones. It's like this symphony of neural activity orchestrated by exposure, interaction, and this innate drive we have to make sense of the world around us.
Okay, I have to ask, does this mean everyone learns language in the exact same way, at the same pace?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a critical point. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to language development. Just as each of us has our own unique experiences, perspectives, our language journeys are also going to be uniquely our own.
So while we might all follow, like, a general path, there's room for individual variation, different starting points, even detours along the way.
Exactly. And this is where things can get a little tricky. While many children navigate these stages effortlessly, some might encounter delays or challenges. And unfortunately, there's always a risk of misdiagnosis, especially when a child's language background differs from the dominant language of their environment.
You're talking about situations where a child might be multilingual, growing up in a home where a dialect or a language other than the school's language is spoken.
Precisely. The work of Jim Cummins, a researcher who's dedicated his career to really understanding language acquisition in multilingual contexts, highlights this very issue. He emphasizes recognizing linguistic diversity and understanding that just because a child may not immediately speak the school's language fluently, it doesn't mean they have a language disability.
That's such a crucial point because if a child's entire linguistic repertoire, their full command of language, isn't considered during assessment, we risk mislabeling them, potentially limiting their educational opportunities.
Absolutely. We need to approach language assessment with this cultural sensitivity, valuing the richness and diversity that children from various linguistic backgrounds bring to the table. Their skills and knowledge might manifest differently, but that doesn't diminish their capacity to learn and thrive.
This naturally leads us to a topic that I think sparks a lot of debate: bilingualism. Is it true that exposing young children to two languages simultaneously creates confusion, like hinders their development?
It's a common misconception, but research actually paints a very different picture. Studies on simultaneous bilinguals, children exposed to two languages from birth or early on, show that while their vocabulary in each language might be initially smaller compared to their monolingual peers, they catch up, and quickly.
So no long-term disadvantages.
Not at all. In fact, there's a lot of research, including some really groundbreaking work by Ellen Bialystock, that suggests bilingual children often exhibit advanced cognitive skills. They're not just learning two languages, they're gaining a cognitive edge.
Like what kind of advantages are we talking?
Well, one of the most notable is enhanced metalinguistic awareness. Think of it as developing a heightened sensitivity to the mechanics of language itself. These children are better at grasping the concept of words, sentences, grammar. It's like having X-ray vision for language.
That makes a lot of sense. They're basically getting a crash course in language analysis just by, like, navigating two languages every day.
Precisely. They are developing this keen awareness that a single concept can be expressed in different ways, with different sounds, different grammatical structures. This heightened awareness, in turn, can be a tremendous advantage, especially in academic settings. Mastering literacy skills, learning new languages, even excelling in fields that require complex problem solving.
It's like they're training their brains to be more flexible, more adaptable, just by being immersed in this bilingual environment.
Exactly. And the benefits extend beyond just the cognitive. There are also these profound social and cultural advantages to bilingualism. Children who speak multiple languages often possess a wider worldview, a greater ability to connect with people from diverse backgrounds, and this deeper appreciation for different cultures.
It's like they're not just learning new words, but like unlocking entire new ways of seeing, experiencing the world.
Precisely. Bilingualism, it's not just about acquiring another language. It's about expanding one's horizons, enriching one's understanding, embracing the richness of human diversity.
You mentioned earlier something called subtractive bilingualism, which that sounds a bit concerning. What does that mean exactly?
That's an important point to address. Subtractive bilingualism happens when the focus shifts solely to the dominant language, often at the expense of the home language. Imagine a child who primarily speaks Spanish at home, being discouraged from using it in a predominantly English-speaking school.
And what are the potential consequences of that kind of approach?
Well, in some cases, it can lead to language loss. The child gradually stops using their home language altogether. And this, it not only impacts their linguistic abilities, but it can also create a rift between the child and their family, their cultural heritage, even their own sense of identity.
So instead of adding a language, it's almost like subtracting a part of who they are.
In a way, yes. And that's why advocating for additive bilingualism is so crucial. This approach emphasizes maintaining both languages, allowing the child to develop that strong foundation in their home language while also acquiring fluency in the dominant language.
So it's about creating this linguistic environment where both languages are celebrated, where neither is seen as superior or inferior, but rather as these valuable tools for communication, for connection, for self-expression.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that bilingualism, it's not a burden, it's a gift. It's a superpower that lets children move seamlessly between languages and cultures, embracing the richness, the complexity of our multilingual world.
It's amazing how something we often take for granted, like language, can be so intricate. It's like we've been uncovering all these hidden layers.
It really is. And you know what's really inspiring? This journey of language learning, it doesn't just stop in childhood. Those same principles we've been talking about, the interaction, the brain-forging connections, it stays with us.
So it's really never too late to learn a new language, to kind of embark on that adventure of expanding our linguistic horizons.
Absolutely not. It's this misconception that adults can't achieve fluency. And while it's true, our brains might not be as sponge-like as they were when we were kids, they still crave that novelty. They yearn to connect. And learning a new language offers just that. It's a doorway to these new cultures, new perspectives, new ways of thinking.
It's like that rush of excitement you get when you can finally put together a sentence in another language, understand the humor, the nuances, the heart of a culture, in a way, through its words.
Exactly. It challenges those assumptions, broadens understanding, lets us connect on this deeper level.
And to think even later in life, we can still get those cognitive benefits, like that enhanced metalinguistic awareness we talked about.
Absolutely. It's never too late to flex those cognitive muscles. Just like, physical exercise keeps our bodies strong, engaging with new languages, new ways of thinking. It keeps our minds agile, adaptable.
So for anyone listening who's ever thought about, dusting off that language learning app, or finally booking that trip to a country where they barely speak the language, go for it. Embrace the challenge, the stumbles, those aha moments.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's not just about memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. It's about immersing yourself in the music of a new language, allowing yourself to stumble, to laugh at your mistakes. You gradually find your voice within that new landscape.
Yeah.
It's an adventure for the mind, a journey of self-discovery.
As we wrap up this incredible deep dive into, well, the world of language, I'm struck by just how powerful and adaptable the human brain really is. From those early interactions that really shape our first words to this remarkable capacity to master multiple languages, it's incredible. It speaks to this innate drive we have to communicate, to connect, to try to make sense of this, well, this complex and beautiful world that we live in.
It really is.
Yeah.
And if there's one key takeaway from everything we talked about today, it's that language isn't static. It's not this destination. It's a journey. It's constantly evolving. We're learning, adapting, discovering these new ways to express ourselves and engage with the world around us.
I love that. Language as a journey. So to our listeners, wherever you are on your own language journey, whether you're fluent in 5 languages or still working on your second, remember, that act of engaging with language, of stretching those linguistic muscles, it's a testament to the power and potential we all have within us. Keep those conversations flowing, keep exploring, keep that curiosity for language alive. Until next time, happy learning.